I came home, expecting a quiet evening, but nothing about my day suggested that everything I knew was about to unravel. As soon as I stepped through the door, I could sense something was off. My wife was sitting on the couch, her face illuminated with a kind of excitement and anticipation that I hadn't seen in a long time. Before I could even take off my jacket, she spoke. "I've decided to carry a baby for my best friend. I'm going to be her surrogate." For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard her right. My mind struggled to process her words. She said it so casually, as though she were telling me she'd picked up groceries on the way home. But this wasn't a casual topic. This wasn't something you just drop into a conversation without a warning. I let out a short, disbelieving laugh, waiting for her to clarify. Maybe it was just a thought she was still considering, maybe even hypothetical, but she wasn't joking. Her eyes locked onto mine with unwavering certainty. "You what?" I finally managed to ask. "I'm going to carry a baby for her. She and her husband have been struggling for years. I can do this for her, and I will. It's my body, my choice." The way she said it, like it was already a done deal, hit me harder than the words themselves. This wasn't a discussion. She wasn't asking for my input. She was telling me what was going to happen. 100 questions raced through my mind, but the first one that slipped out was, "When were you going to talk to me about this?" She rolled her eyes, as though I was making a big deal out of nothing. "I'm talking to you now." "No," I snapped. "You're telling me now." She sighed, as though my reaction was predictable, like she had already rehearsed this conversation in her mind and decided I was the unreasonable one. "I don't understand why this is such a big deal for you," she said. "This is my body, my decision. I'm doing something good, something selfless." My stomach tightened. "You don't see how this affects both of us?" "Of course I do," she replied, but her voice lacked sincerity. "But it's not like I'm cheating on you. I'm just carrying a baby for someone who can't." She said it as if it were simple, as though it wouldn't change everything, as though it wouldn't affect us. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're telling me that for nearly a year, you'll go through pregnancy, hormonal changes, doctor visits, everything that comes with it, and I'm just supposed to be okay with that. What about our life? What about us?" She waved her hand dismissively. "It's temporary. Nothing will change between us." I stared at her, searching for some trace of the woman I married, the one who used to talk things through with me before making major decisions. But all I saw now was someone who had already moved past this conversation before I even stepped through the door. "I should have at least been part of this decision," I said, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. She shook her head, her face twisting with frustration. "This isn't about you." And that was it. That was the moment I realized just how little my opinion mattered in this marriage. This wasn't a partnership anymore. She had made her choice, and she expected me to fall in line. I didn't say another word. I just stood there, the weight of her words sinking in, pressing down on me like a vice on my chest. She had made her decision, and now I had to make mine. I sat down, tried to gather my thoughts, but she was already moving on, acting as though the conversation was over. She grabbed her phone and began typing, likely texting her friend to let her know everything was set. I wasn't even part of the equation. I forced myself to speak, trying to push back. "You can't just expect me to be okay with this." She sighed, setting her phone down with a frustrated expression. "What exactly do you want me to say? I've already made my decision. That's a problem." I shot back. "You made a decision on your own. Do you really not see why that's a problem?" She crossed her arms and leaned back on the couch. "I see that you're overreacting. This is my body, and I have every right to do whatever I want with it. I don't need your permission." It felt like talking to a wall. I wasn't trying to control her or tell her what to do. I just wanted to be part of the conversation, to have my feelings taken into account. But every time I tried to express that, she shut me down, deflecting any attempt at real discussion. "You're making it sound like I'm trying to control you," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "That's not what this is about. This is about our marriage. It's about us and how this will affect both of our lives." She scoffed. "It's 9 months, a year at most if you count recovery. You're acting like I'm leaving you or something." I clench my jaw, my patience wearing thin. You're carrying a child for someone else. Do you even realize what that means? The physical toll, the emotional toll. She cut me off. I've already thought about it. I almost laughed. She might have thought about it, but had she truly considered the reality of what it would do to our relationship, to our home, the stress, the complications, I doubted it. So that's it, I asked, my voice lower now, tired. I just have to accept this? She didn't hesitate. Yes, one word, one final, unwavering answer. I let that sink in. She hadn't asked for my opinion because she never intended to hear it. She had already made up her mind, already committed to this, and my feelings were irrelevant. This wasn't just about surrogacy anymore. It was about our marriage, what it had become, a relationship where she made the big decisions and expected me to simply adjust. You're really not going to consider how I feel about this? I asked, hoping for even a hint of hesitation in her expression. Instead, she rolled her eyes. I'm considering how you feel, but at the end of the day, this is my choice. I don't need your approval. She said it as though the conversation was over, like I should just move on. I sat there, watching her, realizing that everything had already changed, not because of the surrogacy itself, but because of what it represented. The way she dismissed me, the way she saw her decisions as hers alone, without regard for how they affected us. She had made her choice, and for the first time I started to wonder if I needed to make mine. Days passed, but the conversation never left my mind. I kept waiting for her to bring it up again, to acknowledge how much this was affecting me, maybe even reconsider, not necessarily her decision, but at least the way she went about it. But she never did. In her mind, everything was settled, and I was just supposed to adjust. I tried at first. I told myself that maybe I was overreacting, that with time I'd learn to accept it, but the more I tried to bury my feelings, the stronger they became. Growing into something impossible to ignore, everything between us began to shift. It was subtle at first. Our conversations became shorter. The warmth in her voice when she spoke to me seemed to fade. It wasn't that we were fighting, we just weren't connecting. She had made a decision for herself, and in doing so, she had shut me out. I started to notice how much time she was spending with her best friend. They had always been close, but it felt different now. They were constantly texting, making plans, and meeting up. I'd come home to find her on the phone, fully engaged in conversation, her voice filled with excitement. But when she spoke to me, it was different, like I was just another task on her to-do list, something she had to check off. A few times I tried to bring it up, but she brushed me off. You're overthinking it, she said when I mentioned how distant she seemed, but I wasn't imagining it. I knew what distance felt like. It wasn't just about words or actions. It was about presence, and hers was no longer with me. Then came the appointments. She never asked me to come with her. She went alone or with her best friend. It was like I had been completely excluded from the process, reduced to nothing more than a spectator in my own marriage. One evening, she came home, her face glowing with excitement, more animated than I had seen her in months. They confirmed everything, she said, setting her bag down. The doctors said we're ready to start the process. That word, we, hit me harder than I expected. There was no we in this. There was her friend, and then there was me, standing on the sidelines, watching it all unfold. I tried to ask how she was feeling, if she had any concerns, if she was nervous about what was coming next, but she barely entertained the conversation before shifting to something else. It became painfully clear that her excitement wasn't just about the surrogacy, it was about finding a purpose outside of our marriage. She was so absorbed in what she was doing for her friend that she had stopped caring about what was happening between us. The walls were closing in, and I could feel it. The distance between us wasn't just emotional anymore. It was tangible. I went to bed that night, knowing something had shifted. This wasn't just a rough patch. It was something we wouldn't recover from. The weeks that followed felt like a blur. Wake up, go to work, come home to a stranger. That's what she had become to me. Someone I barely recognized. Someone who didn't seem to notice how much I was slipping away. And maybe that was the hardest part, how little it seemed to matter to her. I kept telling myself I needed to talk to her again, to make one final effort to reach out, to salvage whatever we had left. But every time I opened my mouth, I hesitated because, deep down, I already knew the answer. Then, one night, it finally happened. She came home from another appointment, one I didn't even know about until she walked in, holding paperwork. I watched as she tossed it onto the kitchen counter, acting like it was just another errand, another step in her plan. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You didn't think to tell me you had an appointment today?" She barely looked up as she kicked off her shoes. "It was just a routine check, nothing major." "That's not the point," I said. "Try and keep my voice steady." She sighed, clearly irritated. "What's the point then? Why are you making this an issue?" I shook my head because you made it clear that none of this involves me. You don't even try to pretend anymore. That got her attention. She turned to face me, arms folded. "I told you from the start that this was my choice. You act like I owe you something just because I made a decision that doesn't revolve around you." I felt my fists clench at my sides. "That's not what this is about, and you know it." "Then what is it about?" She shot back. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "It's about the fact that you don't care what this is doing to us." Her expression hardened. "I do care, but I also know this is important, and I'm not going to change my mind just because you're uncomfortable." I let her words hang in the air between us, letting the weight of them sink in. "This isn't just about discomfort," I said, my voice quieter now. "It's about respect, about trust, about a marriage that's meant to be a partnership, but somehow only one of us gets to make the decisions." She scoffed. "So you expect me to just give this up because you don't like it? That's not how this works." I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt or betrayed. I was just done. "No," I said, my voice firm. "That's not how this works, and I think we both know that." For the first time, I saw something shift in her expression. But it wasn't regret or concern. It was just annoyance, like I was making things harder than they needed to be. That was the moment I knew there was nothing left to fight for. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I woke up earlier than usual, moving quietly as I got dressed. She barely stirred. I stood there for a moment, looking at her, waiting to feel something: anger, sadness, regret. But there was nothing, just an overwhelming certainty that I couldn't stay here any longer. I left without a word, just walked out the door and kept going. Not to work, not to clear my head, but to take the first real step in leaving it all behind. It wasn't an impulsive decision, nor was it out of spite. It was the only choice I had left. I had spent weeks, months, watching the foundation of our marriage crumble beneath us, trying to hold it together alone. But last night had shown me the truth. She wasn't interested in fixing anything. By the time I came home that evening, I had already spoken to a lawyer and set everything in motion. She was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. She looked up briefly, but didn't say anything. Just another evening. Just another day where I was an afterthought. I set my keys on the counter. "We need to talk." She barely glanced up. "About what?" I didn't hesitate. "I'm leaving." That got her attention. She frowned, setting her phone down. "What do you mean?" I exhaled, keeping my voice steady. "I mean, I'm done. I can't do this anymore." Her eyes narrowed. "You're overreacting." There was again her dismissive tone, refusing to acknowledge how much she had pushed me away. I shook my head. "No, I'm done." She blinked, as if only now realizing I was serious. "So that's it? You're just walking away?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I should have walked away a long time ago. She stared at me, her expression unreadable. I expected anger, maybe even an argument, but instead, she just shrugged. "So, you're giving up on our marriage because you didn't get your way?" That was all I needed to hear. Even at the very end, she couldn't see it. She couldn't understand that it wasn't about getting my way. It was about respect, about trust, about a relationship that was supposed to be a partnership but had become something entirely different. "I'm not the one who gave up," I said simply. She didn't respond, didn't try to stop me. She just stood there, watching as I turned and walked out the door. And this time, I didn't look back. I didn't look back as I walked away from that house, from her. It felt strangely effortless. For so long, I had told myself that I needed to stay, that I had to find a way to fix everything. But the truth was, there was nothing left to fix. She had made her choice, and now I had made mine. I stayed in a hotel for a few days while I figured out what to do next. I didn't rush to find a new place or bury myself in distractions. I allowed myself to sit with the reality of it all. I wasn't in shock, and I wasn't waiting for some overwhelming flood of emotions to crash over me. I just felt done. She didn't reach out. No calls, no texts, nothing. And that silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. When the papers were served, I got the confirmation I had been expecting. She wasn't going to fight it. No pleading, no attempt to change my mind. Just a simple acknowledgement that this was happening. It almost felt laughable. I had spent so much time wondering if leaving would make me the villain in her eyes. If she would try to paint me as the selfish one, the one who walked away. But in the end, she let me go as easily as she had shut me out. That's what hurt the most. Not the arguments, not the final conversation, but the fact that I had been so easy to replace. I moved into a new apartment, a small place that felt more like home than our house ever did. I expected to miss her, to feel that ache of loneliness, but instead, I felt lighter. The weight I had been carrying for so long had finally lifted, and I understood why I had been alone long before I ever left. People asked me what happened. Friends, family, they all wanted answers. I kept it simple. We wanted different things. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole story either. It was enough. Some people said I should have tried harder. That marriage was about compromise, but that was the problem. Compromise only works when both people are willing to meet halfway. I had been the only one trying to hold things together, and you can't save something when the other person doesn't care if it falls apart. She moved on, or maybe she had already moved on before I left. Either way, I didn't waste time thinking about her. She had made her priorities clear, and for the first time in a long time, I had made myself priority. I walked away without regret, not because it didn't hurt, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. And that was enough. Our story has come to an end.